Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Now we get, I think, fascinating people on this series. I'm really, I'm amazed at the people we can get on here, and there are occasional episodes where I learn a great deal about a topic that I sort of think I know about, but then I realise I don't, because when we're talking to people who are really embedded in those areas, it's fascinating. So just a very brief bit of background, which I think I do explain very briefly on on this episode. I did quite a lot of filming for British TV company ITV now I work it out, I think it was 2015, about Formula E, the Formula E racing thing. But before it started, so I was doing stuff about the motors and the batteries and the technology behind it. And it was, very early days then. And what we're going to learn today is how far and how fast that has developed and how internationally popular it is. And I think it's kind of gone under the radar a bit in the UK. It's very big in other parts of the world, partly because there was a period of time when they didn't have any races in the UK, and it's not on terrestrial television. It's you have to be a kind of enthusiast. If you're not actually live at the actual race, then you've got to kind of know where to find the footage. You can follow them online easily, but from this year, Channel 4 in the UK, and then many terrestrial broadcasters around the world are broadcasting the Formula E races. And I think that's going to make a really big difference. It's going to lift the kind of general public awareness, because what you will learn in this episode is how, and this is what I've tried to focus on, is the connection between motor racing, which is, an expensive sport, but it has a direct relevance to the cars that we drive on the road. And that's, lots of people in the kind of motor industry and motor racing know that. And that is not new to Formula E. It's, Formula One, all that sort of motor racing. A lot of the technology is completely normal now. Anti-lock brakes, disc brakes, it goes on and on. It was absolutely developed in motor racing, and that's being seen in completely new ways now with electric motor racing, with Formula E, which is extraordinary. I'm just going to tell you one thing: a Formula E car accelerates from 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. Last year, this year will be faster. So these are not sluggish cars; they really shift. So today, I'm joined by James Barclay, who runs the Jaguar Formula E team. And he is just a ball of enthusiasm and knowledge and understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it. And it just takes the engineering skills that are required to do that to another level. It's not just we want to make the car that goes fastest. We want the driver to win. That's absolutely critical. They do, but they are completely focused and on developing the technology that they use, and that it is the most extraordinary episode. So please do stick around and listen to that. But before that, I just want to introduce a quick word from our gorgeous sponsors who make this podcast possible and make it possible for us to get in touch with people who run Formula E teams and get them on the pod. So over to My Energy. My Energy is putting the I back into British innovation. My Energy is putting the I back into inventing the future. My Energy is putting the I back into inspiring a nation. Recharging the world with green, smart energy. Charge your EV with your PV and more. Visit myenergy.com and help to spark the green revolution. My Energy. Driving the charge to a greener future. Well, there we go. Thank you so much to My Energy. We really are incredibly grateful to them. They've stuck with us through thick and thin in the last couple of years. But now let me introduce to you, without more ado, James Barclay on the Fully Charged Plus podcast. So, James, thank you so much for joining us. This is very exciting to see what's happened in that. Well, I just very brief bit of background on my involvement with Formula E. I was hired by ITV the year before the first season of Formula E, which now I can't even remember when that was. There was
2014, 2015 it would have been.
2014. Okay, so probably 2013, 14. I went to, I think, Williams and McLaren, and we looked at the motors and the back. So I did the technical stuff, how that works, and it was just so thrilling. And then for numerous reasons, I didn't go. I didn't even see a race the first year, which is really frustrating. And the second year, I then went to Paris and Berlin and I saw the London one, whenever year that was. Anyway, that was, and it was such an extraordinary change at that point from the motor racing I grew up with. I grew up near Silverstone when I was a little kid. So I saw motor racing like that, which was essentially one, noisy, two, out in the middle of nowhere on an old runway.
Yeah.
All those things, and very, noisy and smelly, but nowhere near a city. So to see that change where the races were, effectively in cities is amazing. But this is quite good in a way, because I always like to talk about things I'm genuinely ignorant about. I've kind of lost touch with it over the last few years because the developments have been remarkable. I mean, that first year, they had to swap cars halfway through the race because they couldn't do the full distance. And
that's right.
So much has changed. So, I mean, I would like to kind of partially focus on the technical aspects of the cars and how you operate now. And really, it's that I think our listeners would be the most interested in, and then how those technologies that you're learning about in the team will then filter down to things like the I-Pace, because that was the second time I got involved with Formula E, was when the I-Pace was launched.
Of course.
And that technology, learned a lot about how that technology is leaking over. There's one thing I just want to quickly say. I just looked it up. Is that the Jaguar I-Pace its curb weight is 2,208 kilos, and the curb weight of your Formula E car is 903.
Correct.
I think that tells us quite a lot. Mind you, there's less luggage space in the Formula E car.
There's quite a bit of luggage space, and nearly half the battery capacity as well. So obviously a lot of that is the battery pack. Yeah, so 90 kilowatt hour versus a 52 kilowatt hour battery. So quite a big step in kind of capacity there. Exactly.
Yes, and that is, I think, because that's okay. Let's do. Do you know things? Dull things like how many miles to the kilowatt hour the cars are doing when they're racing?
It literally changes race by race. Yeah, we can give you some kind of broad figure after the call today, actually. But on the line now, it really depends on race. So it's kind of very dependent on circuit strategy. A bit like in Formula One, if you're on a qualifying lap versus a race lap, it does. That's part of the game. Actually, is optimizing that miles per kilowatt, basically, as you say.
Yes. Because because I know Sam Bird is one of your drivers, isn't he? And I've met Sam and interviewed him a couple of times in the past. And what is fascinating with talking to him is not like, okay, so my brother worked in Formula One engineering. I mean, building Formula One cars in his career. He's retired now, but at times he did that. And he would only ever be able to communicate in terms of cubic capacity, litres, torque, acceleration, all that stuff, and certainly the drivers would have talked about the cars in terms of their top speed and their maneuverability and all that stuff. But Sam Bird he had really detailed knowledge of his energy usage, which is, I don't think a Formula One driver would know, well, look, I'm doing 4 miles to the gallon when I'm thrashing it or whatever. That isn't a thing. They would just know how fast they go and how fast they can go around a corner, I'm assuming. But his knowledge of energy use was really surprising.
Yeah, and I think the sport's changed in that sense. And it's in Formula E, it's your lap time is delivered from how efficient you are. So fundamentally, the more efficient you are, the faster you are. So think about it as the faster you can go from the least amount of energy possible, it makes your performance, right? That's what delivers your lap time, and then it delivers your race time. And the fastest average time across the 45 minutes plus one lap ultimately is what wins, right? So that's kind of what is the kind of holy grail everyone's looking for. And I think probably in Formula E, the drivers have to be over everything, and it's why Formula E is such a challenge from the driver point of view. So you've got to be an absolute professional, incredibly fast, incredibly kind of reliable for delivering great race performances as a driver, but you've also got got to calculate energy, you've got to give your energy to your engineers, because we don't have a huge amount of the incredibly expensive, incredibly complex pit-to-car communications, because we want the drivers to manually have to do that rather than the car automatically do that to a laptop and an engineer sitting in the garage.
Right.
We want Formula E to induce driver error, because that's kind of going back to the days when Formula One used to be great with manual gear change. The drivers made mistakes. By making everything so automated that you don't make any mistakes, you take away the variability. And so the technical regulations of Formula E ensure there's a balance to sort of stress ratio, which means that the drivers have to do a hell of a lot as well as driving racing, and the team have to work with the driver to minimize that workload where possible within the regulations. So that's part of the trick. And the drivers as a result are very technically aware, but also very strategically aware, probably more than any other racing category I've ever come across. And why you have very, very fast drivers who maybe don't quite kind of have struggled in Formula E, because being fast is one thing, but being able to multitask, it's a bit like flying a fighter jet. I think you've got to multitask. You have to do your flying the plane, you have to do your navigating, you have to do your weapons management. In a racing car in Formula E, it's very similar.
Right. And I mean, also, so then, in fact, the only way that you would know, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you would know what the energy capacity in the battery pack was is verbally from the driver, rather than you don't have all that information in front of you on screens.
Exactly right. I mean, that's exactly it. You'll be amazed to hear that in the race team, the only official time we know the state of charge on their battery is when it comes up on the broadcast that the world sees. So when the fan at home sees you have 60% of battery left, that's the only
so
time
they can see. So the fans can see it, but you can't.
They see it at the same time as us. And what's amazing is, you only get to see that 5-6 times during a race. It's not always on the graphic. It comes up and comes down. So when it comes up, you can imagine that's the first thing everyone is across and analysing. So we as a team have to develop tools based on the communication with the driver, telling us the consumption of that lap. And then we create tools which kind of accurately, if you like, monitor and plot that. So before a race, we do a lot of simulation. And one of the incredible things about Formula E is the simulation capability, and why simulation software in Formula E, we really are at the forefront. And we can come on to that in a bit more detail. But basically what we do ahead of a race is we run race simulations. We run lots of them with a driver in what we call a driver in the loop simulator. And we basically look at the optimal strategy from a setup point of view, from everything mechanical setup and how we're going to get the car to optimize performance. And we do lots of those practices before we turn up at the track. And then when we get to the track, we know an energy target and a plot that we should have. And we basically plot that on a chart. And then when the driver gives us the actual lap targets and gives us a report of where they are on lap by lap basis, we then plot that against our predetermined plot of where we think we should be. And that tells you you're in great shape sometimes, and other times it tells you we're way off target. We've got to save energy. So there's a lot of work done on strategy. There's a lot of work done on machine learning. There's a lot of work done on really kind of state of the art software to ensure that we're reducing the variables, right? We're trying to avoid any surprises, and sometimes you can't be the master of your destiny. So if you're not leading a race and someone else is dictating the pace, you can't run that perfect strategy that you thought you could do. So it's and Sam has used this phrase. Sam's used the phrase, it's like a game of chess at high speed, and it's absolutely right. You don't have one strategy. You have to react to what everyone is doing around you, but you don't have one chess player, one person you're playing against. You have, in the case of Formula 11 other teams, 22 other drivers, and you have to react to each one of those and what they do, or not react. And it's kind of developing your strategies around how you manage that through a race, which makes it incredibly exciting as a racing format. It's why at an engineering level, the race engineers really are loving Formula E. They find it incredibly rewarding. And at a driver level, it's really it's very taxing, very challenging, and why I think we've probably got the most talented driver lineup in the world. It's the only championship where you have 22 fully professional racing drivers. There's not a single driver bringing budget to be in Formula E. Formula One doesn't have it. IndyCar doesn't have it. NASCAR doesn't have it. All the iconic racing categories of the world. That doesn't happen. So, and there's reason for it. Is because we have to have drivers that can be the best at all these elements. It's really quite fascinating from that point of view. Yeah,
it is. It feels like a very, I've only met a handful of the drivers over the last few years, and but I have met quite a lot of motor racing drivers from the more traditional end of the sport, and they struck me as people who have a missing gene. There's no fear. That seems to be the critical thing. They're not scared. And when I've been driven around tracks by proper racing drivers, I have the fear gene quite firmly entrenched.
Yeah, well, they're honestly they're incredible athletes. I think what is amazing, as you say, it's they have fear, but it's a very different level, right? The
Yeah,
baseline is incredibly different, and that's an important measure to have, because if they have none, you have to have an element of knowing where that limit is. But
yeah,
their threshold is incredibly high, but their ability to drive a car incredibly fast and is barely using their brain capacity, which is incredible at the top level. Really, they have so much more capability to do other things then as well at this level. So the driving becomes second nature to them. It's then being able to do your work whilst also driving. Talk to your engineers, think of a strategy, work out what your move will be in 5 or 6 laps time. Whereas to most human beings, your capacity would be completely taken up by just steering, braking, accelerating.
Getting around the circuit. Mine would be 100% absorbed by getting around the circuit once.
Correct. Yeah,
That's half the speed they drive. Yeah,
You hear the phrase in particularly motorbike racing. They call them aliens sometimes, right? Because it's hard for us to always fathom how they do that whilst going so quickly. But it's an amazing skill set. And as athletes, they're really kind of very admirable.
It's also that, and all the footage that comes out of the cockpits or from the cars. The different. I have actually driven myself. I've driven around Silverstone a few times in cars that are faster than I've gone around faster than you drive on the road as a plodding pedestrian driver. But the width of the track, the spread outness of it, even when you're going past the stands and they're a long way away and you're in this very small car on this very wide road. Formula E is the exact opposite of that, because it's usually very, like the last race I saw was in Paris, and I'd stand at various points around the track, go, that is very narrow. So when you see the speed you're aware of, because you've got things passing you at nearly 150 miles an hour, very, very close.
Yeah, exactly, Robert. What's that? And a really interesting element there, which is Formula E. One of its unique DNA items is that we race on city centre circuits. Unlike any other racing category,
and also bumpy streets. That's the other thing I think is important.
Exactly. Yeah. So
it's very smooth.
Yeah. Exactly. They're not billiard table smooth. You've got manhole covers, you've got pedestrian crossings. We've had braking zones in bus stops, which, still have a bit of residue diesel on them and things. Right. And because, 5 hours earlier, it was an active bus stop, and now we're racing on it. So it makes an incredible kind of visual effect. But from a race team point of view and a driver point of view, those are part of the challenges. No two circuits are the same. We race on concrete in Berlin, and we literally we've raced over tram lines in places like Zurich in the past. So it's incredibly varied. You have to have a car which dynamically can deal with all that. But you also have to have drivers and teams have the ability to adapt, and adaptation is incredibly important. But then you get to the challenge of the driving point of view, and you also have the scenario where, at a Silverstone, if a driver in qualifying pushes slightly too far in some corners, the worst is they put a wheel onto the grass, no problem. In Formula E, if you do that, you go over that margin, you've taken the left-hand side of your car out, and you basically are lucky if you make it through to the next session. If you do it in qualifying, you may not make the race. If you do it in free practice too, you may not make it to qualifying. The jeopardy is so much higher, and your momentum is it can be so detrimented by having an early accident on a race day. We have a one-day format where you practice, qualify, and race in one day, and you don't have time to fix the car overnight because you pushed too hard in qualifying. So it's this balance of risk and reward all the time in Formula E, but it is what makes the show very exciting. And you do see drivers being punished for mistakes, and you see a lot of cars damaged sometimes in Formula E, and that is because there is no margin for error, and it does mean that as a team you've got to deal with all the efficiency, the performance side, but you've also got to kind of you've got to balance that margin, and then you see in qualifying, and sometimes we have 0.2 of a second separating over 20 cars. And then there is no margin. You literally are. Normally, sometimes in qualifying, it's very unlikely that you don't see drivers in the top positions grazing the wall. You have to literally be touching the wall at, in some cases, 160 miles an hour to be in that top 3 cars. So it's not only, of course, from a tech point of view, it's incredibly exciting. We'll come on to that, but from a racing, a sporting point of view, it is incredibly almost gladiatorial, because you have this no compromise racing environment and it's in the heart of these incredible cities, these incredible vistas and backdrops. And it's why I think Formula E is, it's only 8 years old, but it is accelerating, it's growing really quickly, because it's incredibly young, startup still. But the ingredients we think are incredibly exciting. You have at the heart of it what I like to think of as purpose-driven sport, right? We're using electric vehicle technology to showcase the benefits of electric vehicles, both from a sustainability point of view, but just a general improvement in lifestyle. City centres with zero emissions is a far better world to be in.
Yeah.
But then you're doing it through this lens of a sport which is incredibly competitive, which has virtually no margin, which is, as I mentioned, incredible kind of cast of drivers and teams. So we believe it's really, really compelling. But it's only 8 years old, which is exciting.
Yes.
So it's still nowhere near the might of some of our other racing categories that exist. But the trajectory and the core ingredients, we believe are more compelling than probably anything we've seen in the last 50 years. It really is phenomenal from that point of view.
Yeah. So because one of the key things, I mean, I think when the first year I was conflicted about Formula E because I was so obsessed with it. I thought it was such a brilliant thing to do. But when the two compromises were in that first year, all the cars were identical and they could only do half a race. And when you're in the role of trying to promote electric transport, and you've got to admit to these two massive compromises in this sport, it's just like, oh yeah, but I mean, still really good, But now that's completely changed. I know that was in the past.
Yeah.
What I'm intrigued by now is how I've lost track of whether the cars now are individually built. I mean, are they all slightly different, or are they more different than they were in those early seasons?
Yeah, Robert, that's a good question. So what we've basically got with Formula E, as you say, we're in what we call Generation 2 of Formula E. And the first generation was simply proving you could race electric vehicles. And as you say, there were some compromises, but I think the context was, any great kind of adventure is got to be exactly that, a real adventure. It's got to be really challenging. And to wait until everything's perfect is never ideal in anything in life, right? So you have to have a jump-off point. And you say the jump-off point at the start was, yes, it did mean that originally the plan was to do 20-minute races with Formula E. And they weren't due to do a car change. But they realised actually the product for fans, it needs to be at least 40 minutes to 50 minutes long. So therefore now you need two cars. So the driver change, the car change, came in. Very unusual in motor racing, as you talked about. And obviously it was a one kind of category, one make Formula in terms of everyone around the same powertrain. But I think what landed there is that you could have an all-electric racing championship. There was ingredients that made exciting racing. And that was Generation 1. And obviously Season 2 of Formula E and Season 3 onwards, Season 2 is when you could start, if you wanted to bring your own powertrain into the Formula. So you had some standard components, and then from Season 2 onwards, you could bring some powertrain components. And then we went into what we call Generation 2. So we're in our fourth year of Generation 2 now. This is the last year we call Generation 2. And we went to a car which is more powerful than ever before. Does a complete race distance, does a 45-minute plus one lap race distance with one car. So what that meant is that in that space of time, the first 4 years of Formula E, the technology moved on to the point where you could now do a full race distance. So it showcased, in fact, if anything, it showcased the move in that 4 years of battery technology. That now, rather than having two cars, you could have one car that could do the full race, car weighing roughly the same weight. You also then had a car which is much more efficient because the car is going faster than ever before, and because we're using more power. So you're fundamentally using more power, so you should be going slower over a race distance. But no, because the efficiency was moving on, you could over a race distance travel faster because your battery is roughly the same size, but you could get more out of it. You could travel faster. So we open the tap more to a certain degree because we're using more power, but you could last a race distance, and that's the efficiency. So two key messages: the battery efficiency and the powertrain efficiency. And that's what we've seen in Generation 2. Cars 903 kilograms. We have 250 kilowatts in qualifying mode. And when you put it in context of these street circuits, it's incredibly fast in some cases. I mean, 160 miles an hour, with a street circuit that's 4 or 5 meters wide in places. I mean, it's pretty fast. And so that's been Generation 2. And then so where we are now is as a manufacturer. So we're a manufacturer and a team. We produce our own powertrain, and that equates to fundamentally the areas of open development for manufacturers to develop are the powertrain. So it's basically the electric motor, the inverter, the gearbox, the suspension, all the casing that bolts to. Importantly, it's all the software and all the control systems that we talked about. So the brains of the operation, basically. Most people might know as an ECU in kind of combustion industry speak. It's what we call a motor control unit now. And that controls the electric motor, which obviously is a motor to deliver power, but also it's a generator. So it puts energy back into the battery. So we start a race with not enough battery to range to finish a race, but we have the ability to put energy back into the battery, and that's what electric cars are great about. You need a battery of a certain size, but you can regenerate. And there's talk about using the phraseology people use. It's almost like a power station, because you have a set amount of energy, but the car generates its own power to go further. So that's what's incredibly cool. So that process has become more and more smart. But cleverly in Formula E, we do have some standard components. We have a standard chassis and standard aerodynamics.
Right.
So on the surface, the cars look the same other than their liveries. That's done very importantly, because the investment to have open aerodynamics, we could spend another, into Formula One territory, spending nearly another 50 million a year just on aero. And these are tiny things. You might change a small wing end plate that to the fan, you can't notice that difference. But a Formula One team will be updating its aero all the time. But it doesn't make the show any better. In fact, 9 times it makes the show worse. And it's investment that we're spending in an area which isn't going to move us forward. And the philosophy of Formula E is to put that investment into advancing the powertrain, advancing the technology which will come into future road cars that will make our future road cars more efficient, more exciting, and perform better. So from that point of view, that's why the rule set is like it is to speed up the development of electric powertrains. And we go next year, so we'll be launching season 9 later this year, October, November this year, we'll be starting kind of season 9. And we go to the Generation 3 car, which is lighter again than ever before. The target is 690, 700 kilograms around that weight target, up to 350 kilowatts of power. So where we started in Formula E in its first season, 150 to 350 kilowatts, basically they're significantly more powerful. We're at 250, so it's another 100 kilowatts of where we are now. Lighter, so power to weight, much more. The car will be much more kind of performance, or even faster acceleration, more aggressive to drive with the power delivery. We have a front regen, so we put a regen motor into the front of the chassis now, so you can regen on all 4 wheels.
On all 4 wheels,
we only two-wheel drive on regen and on power. Generation 3 will have 4-wheel regen and 2-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive power, to keep the driving challenge difficult for the drivers. 4-wheel drive, the view is that could make it easier to some degree. But really importantly, other interesting, fascinating things, we have no rear brakes in Generation 3. We lose a traction brake. There's no disc brakes on the back of the car. And why? Because electric motors, you can control braking through regen. So rather than having disc brakes on the rear, which is weight, which is less efficient, you have this benefit of being able to control braking with the motor instead. So it's pushing the kind of the boundaries and the knowledge. And you imagine saying to a team and the driver, you're going to have no rear brakes. That's a big challenge for us to overcome.
Yes.
But we'll be able to do it with regen. So we have some work to do. But it's showcasing. The focus is on showcasing that technology, which is unlike anything else that anyone's seen in racing before, because it's that philosophy which drives change. And that fits with Jaguar, because we originally developed the disc brake. We won Le Mans with it, with a C-Type, and now it's on every production car in the world.
Yeah.
And it takes racing to be at the forefront, pushing the technology sometimes to do that.
Because I think that's the sort of the hidden thing for people who really know nothing about motor racing. And I always say, and why should they? But they actually benefit from it in that sense. And certainly, in the last 50 years from things like Formula One, the technology that was introduced there, some of which didn't work. I mean, I can't remember them now, but I've seen a list of amazing technologies that were tried out in Formula One and then went, yeah, all right, we won't do that. But this is fascinating. The application you can see in road cars that you're developing there. I mean, for instance, that is a perfect example that really makes sense is 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel regen.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing in terms of mass producing automobiles, that is probably less expensive to do than 4-wheel drive, as in 2 motors that can drive or do regen. I'm assuming that it will be a smaller, lighter unit that does the regen off the front wheels than the motor that's on the back wheels.
Correct. You have some efficiencies with that. Exactly right. And it might be in the future we go to 4-wheel drive, but right now that's another step for us to take. And as you say, there's an efficiency gain. We get more regen, a little bit more weight, but if you can counteract that with more regen, there's a gain benefit. But this, as you said, there's many examples in Formula E short space of time in 8 years. One example we've talked about a lot is silicon carbide. So it's a material in the inverter that makes the inverter more efficient, allows faster switching speeds basically in the inverter, and drives more efficiency. Now, that was introduced informally before anywhere else I'm aware of, really. Yes, it existed as an application, but in terms of an automotive context, it was one of the first that I'm aware of. And we've been racing with that for 4 years now. And you see every new EV now. So first generation EVs didn't have silicon carbide inverters. You'll see now all the latest EVs being introduced have silicon carbide. We have 4 years worth of experience racing with that material and that technology and that know-how. And as you said, I think racing is, and one of the benefits of racing, you have some categories which are not about pushing technology, and they're great. They're great entertainment. That's wonderful. But you have some categories that are, as well as being a great sport, great entertainment, are a very worthwhile real-world testbed, and that's what Formula E is for us at Jaguar. It's a real-world testbed of electric vehicle technology. We want to be at the forefront of making the world's best electric vehicles. And how do you do that? You put yourself in an environment where there's nowhere to hide, and you've absolutely got to beat, the most fierce competitors in the world. We're racing against, Porsche, Mercedes, Nissan this year, and to name just a few, right? Incredibly strong DS automobiles, incredibly strong automotive manufacturers who are at the cutting edge. Last year at Audi, BMW. When you beat those people on track, it's because you are absolutely pushing new technology, pushing know-how that hasn't been done before. You're finding new areas of performance. And that only has a benefit for consumers, because the more you can find those areas of opportunity, and some will be more relevant than others, but you have to be in that competitive environment where it's all about pushing the boundaries. It's about being fearless sometimes in terms of pushing that technology and finding those areas, and through that you learn. And that's kind of very much what has always been Jaguar's philosophy. And many categories of motorsport don't, but I think at the cutting edge, at the pioneering level, at the pinnacle, it should be about pioneering new technology as well.
Because I think one of the points that you made that I wanted to make sure that I understood and the listeners understood. You mentioned that at the start of a race, effectively the car hasn't got enough energy in the batteries to finish the race. Is that correct? And that's where regen kicks in. But I mean, that is extraordinary, that simple fact itself.
Exactly. I mean, the cars could do it, but half the point of managing the race distance with regen is to demonstrate regen. So if you had a race distance where you didn't need regen, we could do it. That'd be absolutely fine. But what's unique about electric racing compared to ICE engine racing, combustion engine racing, is that you can create this challenge where it demonstrates the benefit of electric vehicles, which is the cars generate their own energy and therefore can travel further. And that's a great story to tell. Exactly. So in order to have a great showcase, you need to create a format which allows you to demonstrate we have a battery capacity here. We could just make a bigger battery and have a longer race, like you can have a bigger fuel tank. But no, we actually want to say, allow you the challenge to put energy back into the battery, and that's demonstrating the difference with electric vehicles. That's exactly the point of it, and and it does make it exciting. And you see, going back to Formula E in the first seasons, you'd see people doing long periods of lift and coast, where they'd be lifting and coasting. So you regen by hitting the brake pedal, lifting off the accelerator, or pulling a paddle on the steering wheel. And you saw big variances in people getting it very right and very wrong. And some who got it really right could just accelerate past people because they're on the accelerator for longer. It doesn't happen that way in Formula E anymore, because in literally 8 years, again, we've all pushed the boundaries, all taken another step. And now you have, almost a sprint race to some degree in many parts. Yes, there's energy management throughout the race, but you're still trying to do that as fast as you can. So you see these margins getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's great, because in front of your eyes is innovation and evolution.
Yeah, because I suppose the other thing to think of, because it's so different to driving an ordinary car. For one part, all the parts, the technologies, the systems that you're testing, that you use in Formula E, it is the equivalent of someone thrashing a car to death on the road. They're not driving carefully down the shops. They're absolutely pushing it to the limit. That's one aspect of it. But the other one is that if you're driving along in an electric car now, and you're doing 60 miles an hour and you're slowing to pull off the motorway or whatever, and you get some regen, that's a very gentle, the graph would be there's no violence in that. But if you're doing 160 miles an hour and you're coming up to a hairpin bend, you've got to go from 160 presumably to, I don't even know what, 30, 40 miles an hour. A huge drop. Yeah. The spikes in the regen then must be phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. And your challenge is to not have a long coast period to that corner, because you want to maximize that regen with longer distance. Your challenge is to minimize the distance and maximize the regen in that distance. Yes. Exactly. So the Nirvana is hitting
the opposite.
The Nirvana is hitting the brake pedal at the point you would normally with just the laws of physics, right? So that's kind of your nirvana is getting to the point where you just have enough physical capability to stop the car in the distance you've got to make the corner and get the regen you need. And that's exactly kind of one of the holy grails that the teams are working on in Formula E. But that's a great, from a consumer point of view, what does that mean? It just means less notice of having to regen, but it's doing it in the background, and that's a great benefit for consumers as well. So yeah, it's an amazing as a championship. It has an amazing set of kind of, I would say, ingredients that make it incredibly compelling. And this technology element is why we are very passionate about it, and why for Formula E it's unique. Formula E has the exclusivity to be the all electric kind of pinnacle single seater racing championship in the world. So that's something which for both battery electric but hydrogen electric, and so it's very exciting that that's kind of the unique bit of DNA that Formula E has over anything else. But the fact that we do this in city centres, not a traditional race circuit, is the other cool element of it. We're doing it in front of audiences that get to see this, who in many cases have not seen motor races before. I mean, we returned with Jaguar in our first season in 2016, and our return to racing, this iconic British brand, lots of success in racing. Its first motor race back after Formula One was in Hong Kong, the first time a motor race had ever taken place in the streets of Hong Kong. Incredible. So that's just game changing as well.
The vast majority of the people in that audience in Hong Kong would never, where would they have seen motor racing? They just wouldn't, even if they were very keen on, they might have seen it on TV, but they wouldn't have seen it in them. Certainly not on their streets.
Exactly right. And so from our point of view as a company, as a brand, as a business, that's the technology side is incredibly compelling. But we also love the fact that it brings the sport to new people, because racing is in the heart of Jaguar's DNA. So to be able to evolve the sport, and motor racing has never stood still by its nature. We can all hark back to the wonderful days of V12, V10 here in Formula One, for example. But before that, it was V8. And it evolved to that, so it's never stood still, right? So it continues to evolve and develop. And what's exciting is this is we always say that the rate of change, and this is winding back to when we return to the sport in 5 years, in more than we've seen in the last decade, and it's exactly what's played out. 5 years ago, there wasn't a 2030, electric, from 2030 onwards in the UK. We can't sell an ICE engine car. That happened in 5 years. Within 5 years, that evolved. So the world is moving incredibly quickly, and we're in a sport which is becoming more and more relevant to that future world. That's what excites us about it as well.
And in terms of the actual, the source of the electric, I mean, I've always been intrigued by how, and I'm really full of admiration of how Formula E didn't just go, here's an electric car, we'll just plug it into the local grid. I mean, they've gone through the whole process. Where does the electricity come from? Effectively, and I don't know whether that's advanced. I mean, the last time I saw that, there were on-site generators, but they were using biofuel. I mean, what is there?
Exactly,
is there
right.
changes there?
Yeah, absolutely, and definitely, worth our conversation even with the Formula E team on your podcast is that whole exciting kind of that exciting challenge and also journey, because not only is Formula E a proof point for the benefit of electric vehicles, it's also a moving kind of roadshow of technology that puts on a global sport. And sport, concert, all sorts of things. Formula E is kind of pioneering this technology. Whether it's, as you say, the generators that are used that use basically glycerin fuel, so hydrogen fuel, which allows you, but also fuel cell, so hydrogen fuel cell we use in certain races, which is fantastic news. Where you can pull off the grid, but it comes from renewable sources. So where you can from the grid pull from renewable sources is a step change. Where you can generate but use glycerin fuels, then that absolutely kind of that's a new technology. Whether you can use hydrogen fuel cell, another step forward. Whether you use second life batteries, and that's being trialed, that's another area of development. So that's one area. Formula E's been pioneered since the start on tires, for example. We use our tires are fully recycled, the Michelin tire that we use. We have one tire. So if you compare to other racing categories, you may have 3 compounds of slick tire, for example. That's your dry tire. You have an intermediate tire and you have a wet tire. So you could have, in the case of some races, as many as 6 to 7 different tires that you can use, and you then have a larger allocation of those tires. And in some cases, that's another jumbo flying around the world, or another boat with a load of freight on. In the case of Formula E, we have one tyre, wet, dry, indifferent weather, one tire, and we
And
have a very
you don't
limited
change
amount.
those tyres during a race.
Exactly.
That's
We
the
don't
tyre
do
you
a
have.
pit stop to change tyres. We have a very limited allocation of those tyres. Why? And so then one argument could be, well, you could go slightly faster in lap time, but it's not about that because we already go very quickly on the circuits we're on. We're showcasing that we can use one tyre for all conditions, and it creates part of the show. The tyres don't have the same grip as a slick tyre, but that creates more driving challenge. And at the same time, it's less footprint. So we use a recycled tyre, we use less of them, and we have one compound. And so that was, at the time, that was an incredibly bold thing, but I think as a team, as you race with that, it's rewarding for a race team because it sort of takes complexity and it puts more onto the driver, I think, and onto the team. But it's importantly, it's pioneering what is possible. And not just in the cars we race, but the things that support us, whether it's the power, the tyres, and everything. Even our passes. I collected my new paddock pass yesterday for the season, and that's a fully recycled paddock pass. It's everything that. And so Formula E and the FI are really one of the points of Formula E is pioneering in that space as well.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I think it is. You've reminded me because I've sort of been out of the loop particularly the last couple of years, definitely. But you've reminded me of every time I've attended a Formula E event, I've gone, oh my goodness, you sort of forget in between them if you're not like constantly involved in it. Of course they do that, and I've had to drink some of the glycerine for the fuel.
And you're here. You're still here, which is great.
Drink. I tasted it. I was told it was safe. I'm still here anyway. I survived. But I mean, so what are in terms of the technology and how it will develop over not maybe the next couple of years? Because presumably next year, for instance, the battery capacity would that stay the same? Do you think it's not? You're not suddenly going. If there was a new battery technology and you could put 150 kilowatt hours in the same space, I don't know whether you would do it. Would you do it, do you think, or would you just have a smaller battery pack?
Correct. I mean, this goes exactly to the point we said. As an electric kind of area of the sport, we want to showcase the difference with EV racing. So it's not about necessarily just because you can, in packaging size, get a bigger battery. Again, we want to show the benefit of EV racing, things like regeneration. So exactly, the plan is to slightly reduce battery size again, reduce the overall weight of the car, but give us more power. So naturally, you're using more energy, but we're not given any more energy with a bigger battery. So as a team, our challenge, this is exactly the point I made earlier, which is, therefore, as a team, now that's a real head scratcher. So now you have to go faster, use more energy. And you never say, let's just make it work, because you have to win. You have to win, right? So this is about basically developing a powertrain that will go faster than anyone with slightly less energy, but with more power. So the technical challenge means we have to produce an even more efficient powertrain. We have to find ways of regenerating more energy, and we have to do that in a way which the driver can manage and deal with, right? So that's exactly the technical challenge, and that's why the focus on the powertrain is so important, because that will have another big step of learning through Generation 3 as a result of that. So exactly right, and by making the cars lighter, they'll go faster. So there'll be not just the power, but the almost the kind of Colin Chapman ethos, which was lower weight rather than more capacity, reduce weight, right? And so that philosophy in racing has always been true. Is the lighter you make the car, the faster you'll be. So from that point of view, that's going to be really part of the challenge, and we will learn a lot. And then throw in the mixes, like I said, no rear traction brakes. We have to brake with the regen, and now you've got to get that balance right. So when the driver pushes the brake pedal, by pure nature, all it's now braking is the front axle with the disc brakes. So you have to now merge the regenerative braking effect with the mechanical braking effect and make that feel good on the brake pedal, because from a driver point of view, one of the biggest confidence needles is the brake pedal. I think everyone thinks it's about the accelerator, but if you push the brake pedal and it's different every time you push the brake pedal, it feels different, then all of a sudden that concrete wall that you're staring at the end of the straight is not something that you start thinking about more, and you don't want to be thinking about it. So from that point of view, that's the big challenge we've got there as well. So you add these mixes in, and then you have a very realistic kind of a worthwhile test bed for EV technology for the road. We're making the cars lighter, become more efficient, have more power, and introduce things like no rear brakes, which from a production car world is a real kind of potential area of opportunity, right? There's a sustainability benefit in no rear traction brakes. There's a efficiency point of view on cost for a manufacturer. There's all these things that go with it. So it's all very relevant, which is what we like about it.
But what is really infectious, James, is your enthusiasm. And I mean, this is one of the things I've been arguing, and this goes beyond motor racing, but that for instance, the two plumbers I've had at my house recently have plumbed in a new electric boiler, and they're so excited about the technology.
Yeah.
And these guys have been these are not young men. These have been installing gas boilers for the last probably 30 years. And it's so boring. And then there's suddenly this new thing, and they're reading all about it. They're Googling it. They're fascinated. And I think that spreads across the board in that there are, huge challenges without question in weaning ourselves off fossil fuel as the human race. But there are incredible opportunities and incredibly exciting, particularly in engineering, electronics, amazing things that I'd never heard of. Regen braking. Those two words would never have been, they just didn't exist together, did they? Like 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have known what that meant. And it's become this, I'm slightly obsessed, admittedly.
And that's one exactly the reasons why Formula exists. Is to educate. It's to be a global platform, an exciting, entertaining global platform to educate. So what is a motor generator unit? Well, it's exactly that. It's an electric motor. It's not an engine like we used to know it. No. An engine just burns fuel and basically kind of propels you. Well, an electric motor basically propels you, but it's also a generator. So it generates power. Basically, you reverse it and you turn it into a generator as well as propulsion. So, but Formula is there to explain that. It's there to educate on that. And as you say, the technology is incredibly exciting. You look at the ecosystem in the future, and smart home technology links to automotive technology. Your electric car will talk to your home in the future. As we know, greater propensity of homes will be required by legislation like the car industry to have more renewable energy. And as that home has become smarter, everyone has smart home devices now on Hive Energy or other kind of systems that are available, right? It'll start talking to how much storage do you have in your home battery? How much solar energy are you producing? What's your heat pump delivering for your home? What's your car got in charge? And balancing that whole system. There's time when it's cheaper to charge off the grid. It's better to take it from the solar. You use solar. Are you at a peak time but you don't have enough energy in your home battery, but you can use some of your car because you're not planning on going out today? Use some from the car. So we're just scratching the surface. But the future from this point of view is very exciting from, I think, a consumer benefit. One of the big benefits for consumers is electric cars are just generally for most people are just a better way of life in terms of the not having to go on fuel. So just the simple ability of not having to worry. If your car's plugged in at home, it's always full, right? And you use it for anyone who's doing more. There's not many people do more than 300 miles a day in their range, and that's what most EVs do. And just the pure convenience factor is there. So you blend the technology with the convenience, you mix it into the home technology, and actually there's a huge, exciting area ahead of us, which is very positive. But most importantly, the heart of it also, we need to be more sustainable. So it's driving and supporting that as well.
And I mean, I think one of the things that you've mentioned today, which really rings true with us, and the thing we've noticed, I mean, something I've felt, fairly strongly about for a long time, but kept quiet, but is that when we put an episode out that is about a lighter, smaller, cheaper electric car, that gets a lot of attention from our audience. They really like that because, we've reached the point where we've reviewed yet another fairly chunky, heavy 100 kilowatt hour SUV. And, they are fabulous, those cars. I've driven all of them. They're really lovely to drive. But you do think this is I can question the sense behind building in a really big, heavy car. Whereas and what you're pushing is you might not need a 100 kilowatt hour battery to do 250 or 300 miles. You might be able to have a 50 kilowatt hour battery, much smaller, much cheaper to make, that will do 250 to 300 miles. I mean, that, because the car is lighter, it's more aerodynamic, it's more efficient at regen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly right. And then we introduced fast charging. So something I didn't mention for Generation 3, but we introduced fast charging. We've never had fast charging in Formula E before. We charge in the garage. We charge about an hour. We just, we don't need to fast charge. But in Generation 3, we haven't seen the final sporting regulations from the FIA and Formula E on this, but we will have fast charging. So most likely in the form of a pit stop. So
so you might stop and plug in during a race.
Exactly right. So we will be introducing fast charging that will be demonstrated as fast charging. Why? Because the first, I would say, challenge in Formula E and with EVs is about proving range. And I think everyone has understood now that range shouldn't really be an issue. Most people's journeys, I think we did a statistic, and 75% of journeys are less than 100 miles. Most people have.
Yes.
So, So there is enough data there to show that range is no longer the point. but the next element is charging. So if you do need to charge, how fast can you charge? And that's key. So we want to demonstrate that in Generation 3 of Formula E, and this fast charging, if you like, demonstration in the championship will be exactly that. We're pushing the technology because now you have to have an ability to quickly fast charge a battery without creating thermal shock on the battery, which is part of the challenge. You've got to manage the temperature. It's a bit like I say, using your mobile phone when you're on holiday, you have it plugged in, you're in the bright shining sun, it's 36 degrees, and you're using your phone at the same time. It gets incredibly hot very quickly, and then you get a little warning light and it turns off, right? That you can't have that with your car. So we'll be, and in Formula E, if we have that, we're out of the race. So that's our challenge. We have to make a car that we can fast charge, and we're asking the maximum performance from it. Right. So that's exactly the challenge, and it'll be a proof point for the technology again. And off the back of it, we'll be demonstrating the capability. I mean, the Nirvana is, I think it's 4.5 minutes to fill an average car full of fuel. The Nirvana is to get to a charge time or something like that. But it's happening, it's coming, and we'll be a part of that demonstration of that technology as it evolves, which is exciting.
Very exciting. James, it's been fantastic talking to you. It's rekindled my enthusiasm for Formula E. Next year, is there going to be a London Formula E race? I've lost the plot on this altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. So really kind of positively, we last year we formally returned to London. Since we entered the championship, never had a home race. So we returned to London, which is incredibly exciting. Most importantly, from a UK perspective, so now having a home race later this year in London at the Excel Arena. So I think anyone who's listening to this in the UK, please come along. I think the show will reward you in terms of just great racing, but a very interesting kind of technology showcases we talked about. But importantly, in the UK context, also Channel 4. So we have a terrestrial broadcaster, now showing the races live, which is really exciting. So it hasn't been the most accessible on terrestrial TV up until now, but this is a big step change. It's great to see Channel 4 come on. We've seen big shifts in TV audiences in places like Germany with having live terrestrial TV coverage, and now we have Channel 4 with Vernon Cave running the coverage, which is going to be great, familiar face to many. So, and someone who knows Formula E well. So I think that's the other element. Really kind of enjoy watching it now as well, and having the races on easy to watch on kind of good time zones. It should be great.
That'd be great. No, that will make a big difference. Yes, I'd forgotten. I've actually got a note in front of me which goes, mention Channel 4, which of course I'd forgotten to do. So I'm very glad you did. That's very important.
And it's exciting. We have home race in London as a British manufacturer. We have home television coverage with Channel 4. But around the world, we're an international championship, and we're racing in new cities like Vancouver. First time we race in Vancouver this year. An incredible city, which sustainability absolutely at the heart of it. And it's bringing Formula E into Vancouver to showcase the benefits of electric vehicles. They have a big sustainability push. It's all part of making Vancouver a cleaner, greener city. We also go racing in Jakarta, one of the most polluted cities in the world, showcasing the benefits of electric vehicles. So we're racing in Jakarta. I mean, what an incredible challenge it is to put a motor race on Jakarta. There's never been one. We're going to go and do it this year. We also we finished the season in Seoul, in South Korea, which is an incredible city. And it's, again, never been a motor race in the heart of Seoul. And what an incredible place to end the season. So, there was some real kind of exciting additions. Next year, we were due to be in Cape Town this year, but due to COVID, we weren't able to be racing there in February this year. But we'll be back to Cape Town. We'll be going to Cape Town next year, so racing in the southern hemisphere. An incredible city to be racing at. So the future's really exciting. New cities, new venues, great broadcasters coming on board. And as I mentioned, the cars getting even faster, even more exciting. So it's definitely one to re-engage with, Robert.
Absolutely, spot on. Well, on that bombshell, as certain TV presenters have been known to say, I'd like to thank you so much, James, for your time and your enthusiasm and knowledge. Really appreciate what you're doing, and good luck in the next season. And I'll definitely be coming along to the London race. There's no question. I'm going to be there this year. So
thanks, Robert. It's been a privilege to come on and speak to you. Thank you very much for the invite. And please come join us. And everyone listening, please come join us in London or wherever you are in the world.
Well, as I gushed with James, I thanked him a great deal. It was amazing to talk to him. What an amazing man. What an amazing technology. What incredible developments. I just love the idea of lightweight, lightweight electric street cars, normal cars that we drive, rear-wheel drive, front-wheel regen and rear-wheel regen, light, small, with less big batteries that go further. That's what they're made. That's what they're doing. That is what they're doing. Anyway, that's it. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Plus podcast, obviously, on whatever way you listen to it or watch it. Let us know in the comments what you think of these episodes. Tell your friends. That's always very good. You can look at the Patreon link if you want to. I don't want to put any pressure on you, but my goodness me, that's what keeps us going. And that's it. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.